I've been a high school teacher for 12 years, the kind who stays late, buys extra supplies out of pocket, remembers which kid hates group work and which one needs a quiet corner to breathe. I treated my students like they were actual people, not numbers, and for a long time I thought that mattered. At home, I thought the same thing about my marriage. My wife and I had been together since our mid-20s, married for 7 years. No kids yet. She used to joke that my students got the best version of me and she got whatever scraps were left, but she laughed when she said it, so I never took it seriously. The trouble didn't start with one big explosion. It was small, irritating stuff. Her phone was suddenly glued to her hand. She'd roll her eyes when I talked about my day, snap at me for dumb things like leaving a mug in the sink, then 5 minutes later act like nothing happened. She started working late a lot, dressing better for those late nights than she ever did for me. Around the same time, rumors started swirling at school, parents complaining that I was too involved, administration asking weirdly pointed questions about boundaries. It felt like my life was quietly tilting off its axis, and I didn't even know which direction the fall was coming from yet. At first, I told myself I was just tired. Teaching will do that to you, constant noise, constant judgment, everyone convinced they know how to do your job better than you. But the cracks at home kept getting louder. My wife stopped asking when I'd be home. Dinner became a solo activity for both of us, eaten at different times, in different rooms. When I tried to touch her, she stiffened like I'd startled her. Then she'd accuse me of being needy, like wanting basic affection was some kind of flaw. One night, I mentioned a meeting I'd had with the principal about professional conduct. Nothing concrete, just warnings wrapped in vague language. She barely looked up from her phone. Just muttered, "Well, you always get too close to people," and shrugged. That one sentence hit harder than I expected. It felt rehearsed. Like she'd already decided who I was and what I deserved. At school, the pressure ramped up fast. A parent accused me of favoritism. Another hinted at something worse but never said it outright. Administration put me on temporary leave while things were reviewed. I came home early that day, earlier than I ever had in years, carrying a cardboard box with my name on it. I expected shock. Sympathy. Something. Instead, my wife looked annoyed, like my bad day was an inconvenience to her schedule. That was the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. Not just with my job. With us. Being home during the day should have felt like a break. Instead, it felt like I was trespassing in my own life. My wife started locking the bathroom door when she showered, blasting music so loud I could hear it from the driveway. She took calls outside, pacing the backyard like she was afraid the walls might listen. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd snap back, "Why do you care?" or "It's work, relax," even though she'd never once taken a work call outside before. One afternoon, while folding laundry, her phone buzzed on the bed. I wasn't trying to snoop, I honestly wasn't, but the screen lit up with a message preview, "Can't stop thinking about last night." No name, just a heart emoji next to the number. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical, like missing a step on the stairs. When I asked her about it later, casually, she laughed. Actually laughed. Told me it was a group chat joke, that I was being paranoid because I'd lost my job and needed someone to blame. Then she flipped it on me, accused me of invading her privacy, of being controlling. I apologized, even though something inside me was screaming that none of this made sense. That night, she went to bed early, back turned, phone tucked under her pillow like a secret she was guarding with her life. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat, realizing for the first time that I might be the last person to know what was really going on in my own marriage. A few days later, everything collapsed at once. I was using our shared laptop to check my email updates from the district, more vague language, more silence, when a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Her email. She'd forgotten to log out. I froze. I should have closed it. I didn't. There it was. A thread that went back weeks. Long messages, inside jokes, plans. Not vague flirting, full-on emotional intimacy, bleeding into something unmistakably physical. Hotel names. I miss your hands. Wish I was waking up next to you instead. Each line felt like a small, precise cut. Clean. Efficient. Brutal. The worst part wasn't even the sex talk. It was how happy she sounded. Light. Effortless. Like the version of her I hadn't seen in years had been given to someone else without hesitation. While I was still staring at the screen, my phone rang. The principal. He told me the investigation was moving forward and that things didn't look good. Apparently, being the teacher who cared too much made you an easy target when accusations started flying. I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there in silence, surrounded by proof that my career and my marriage were imploding simultaneously. When my wife came home that night, humming to herself, I realized something chillingly clear: she had no idea I knew. And for the first time since this all started, I wasn't confused anymore. I was angry. I didn't plan the confrontation. I just couldn't sit with it anymore. The second she walked in, still in her coat, I asked her straight up who he was. No build-up. No softness. Just, how long have you been sleeping with him? Her face went blank for half a second, just enough to confirm everything, then she snapped into anger like it was a reflex. She laughed, sharp and mean, and told me I was losing it. Said unemployment was clearly making me delusional. When I mentioned the emails, her tone flipped instantly. Not guilt. Rage. She accused me of spying, of violating her privacy, of becoming exactly the kind of man everyone warned her about. Then the lies started stacking up fast. He was just a friend. Okay, maybe more than a friend, but nothing physical. Okay, maybe physical once, but only because we were basically separated anyway. When I reminded her we still lived together, slept in the same bed, and she'd kissed me goodbye that morning, she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. The fight escalated in seconds. She told me my job loss was my own fault, that I'd always crossed lines, that maybe if I paid half as much attention to her as I did to my students, she wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. That one hurt in a way I can't properly describe. It felt like she was rewriting our entire history right in front of me, and somehow making me the villain in every version. At some point, she grabbed her keys and said she was going out to get space. I asked if she was going to see him. She didn't answer. Just slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered. I stood there in the wreckage, hands shaking, realizing that the woman I married wasn't just cheating, she was gone. After she left, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I picked up the broken glass from the frame she'd knocked down and cut my finger without realizing it. Didn't even hurt at first. I just watched the blood bead up and thought, of course this is how it goes, everything breaking at the same time. My phone buzzed while I was standing at the sink. An email from the district. Formal language. Final language. They were terminating my contract pending the outcome of the investigation, effective immediately. No hearing. No chance to explain. Just done. 12 years reduced to a PDF and a signature line. I sank down onto the kitchen floor and laughed, this ugly, hollow sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. An hour later, my wife texted. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just, I'm staying over at a friend's. Don't wait up. I replied with a single question, is it him? And watched the message sit there, unread. That silence told me more than any confession could have. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment of the last year, every dismissed instinct, every time I'd chosen patience over confrontation. I thought about my students, my empty classroom, the way caring too much had apparently made me disposable. And I thought about my wife, how easily she'd blamed me for choices she made all on her own. By morning, I felt wrecked but strangely clear. I couldn't save my job. I couldn't force her to tell the truth. But I could stop pretending this was just a rough patch. Something in me finally understood that this wasn't a temporary collapse. It was an ending. She came back 2 days later like nothing had happened. Walked in, dropped her bag, asked if I'd eaten. No apology, no tension in her voice, just casual, like she hadn't detonated our entire life and gone to sleep in someone else's bed. When I asked where she'd been, she said, with a friend, again, same tone, same dead-eyed confidence. I asked which friend. She sighed dramatically and said I was interrogating her. I told her I knew it was him. She scoffed and said, "You don't know anything." Then she changed the story, said she'd gone there because she was scared of me, that my anger during the confrontation had made her feel unsafe. That one stunned me. I'd never raised my voice, never thrown anything, never touched her. But suddenly I was being cast as a threat, like she was laying groundwork for a narrative where she was the victim and I was the unstable, unemployed husband. When I pointed out the emails again, she said I'd taken them out of context. When I asked why she deleted the thread that morning, she said she didn't remember doing that. Then she said she deleted it because she didn't want to rub it in my face. Every sentence contradicted the last. It was dizzying, like arguing with smoke. At one point she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This wouldn't have happened if you weren't so obsessed with other people's kids." That was it. That was the moment something snapped cleanly inside me. I realized she wasn't just lying to protect herself, she was willing to burn down my reputation, my career, my sense of self, if it meant she didn't have to feel guilty. I didn't argue anymore after that. I just listened. And the more she talked, the clearer it became, she wasn't sorry. She was strategic. That night, after she went to bed, curled around her phone, thumbs moving nonstop, I sat alone in the living room and took stock of what was left. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Every object felt like evidence from a life I no longer recognized. Wedding photos on the wall. Bookshelves I'd built with my own hands. A future we'd talked about like it was guaranteed. I opened my email again and reread the termination notice, this time slowly. No anger this time. Just numb acceptance. I'd given everything to my job because I believed kindness mattered, because I thought treating students like human beings was the point. Now that same reputation was being twisted into something ugly, something I couldn't even fully defend myself against. And at home, the person who was supposed to be on my side was actively sharpening the knife. It hit me all at once, there was nothing left to salvage here. Not the job. Not the marriage. Not the version of myself that kept trying to explain, justify, soften. I realized I'd been operating under the assumption that if I stayed calm enough, patient enough, honest enough, the truth would eventually win. But that only works when the other person cares about the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just felt tired in a way that went deeper than exhaustion. The kind of tired that comes from holding something together long after it's already broken. For the first time since all of this started, I stopped thinking about how to fix things and started thinking about how to leave without losing what was left of myself. The next morning, I told her I needed space. Not in a dramatic way. No accusations, no tears. Just a simple statement. She looked almost disappointed, like she'd been gearing up for another argument and I'd taken that away from her. She asked where I was going. I said I'd figure it out. That seemed to irritate her more than anything else. I packed a bag slowly, deliberately. Every shirt I folded felt like a small goodbye. She hovered in the doorway, throwing out comments like bait, how I was running away, how I always quit when things got hard, how I was proving everyone right about me. I didn't respond. That silence felt powerful in a way yelling never had. It was the first boundary I'd held in weeks. Before I left, she casually mentioned that he understood her in ways I never had. Like it was just a fact, not a weapon. I nodded, thanked her for the honesty, and walked out. The look on her face told me she hadn't expected that reaction. She wanted me angry. Broken. Begging. Instead, I was just done. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town and sat in the car for a long time before going in. No plan. No job. No marriage. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the strange realization that, despite everything I'd lost, my chest felt a little lighter. For the first time since the accusations, the emails, the lies, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I couldn't go back. The fallout came fast, like it had been waiting for me to step out of the way. 2 days into the motel, I got a call from a colleague I trusted. He didn't sugarcoat it. The rumors at school had evolved. What started as too involved had turned into insinuations that made my stomach drop. Nothing proven. Nothing concrete. But enough whispers to make people uncomfortable saying my name out loud. Administration wasn't interested in truth anymore, just damage control. I hung up and stared at the wall, realizing how neatly everything had lined up. My wife's sudden shift. Her comments about me crossing lines. The way she'd casually framed me as unstable, angry, unsafe. I couldn't prove she'd said anything directly, but I didn't have to. The timing said enough. She didn't just leave the marriage, she protected her exit by torching my credibility. I checked my bank account that afternoon. She'd moved money. Not all of it. Just enough to hurt. When I texted her asking why, she replied an hour later with, "I needed it." You're not exactly contributing right now. No explanation. No discussion. Just another quiet, deliberate cut. That night, alone in that motel room that smelled like disinfectant and old carpet, it finally hit me how much I'd lost in less than a month. My career. My home. My partner. My reputation. All gone so quickly it felt unreal, like I'd wake up any second and still have papers to grade. But I didn't wake up. And no one was coming to fix it for me. Up until then, I'd been operating on shock and adrenaline. But that week, the anger finally settled in, quiet, heavy, and focused. Not the explosive kind. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of blurring them. I stopped doom scrolling, stopped rereading old messages like they'd somehow change. I started writing things down instead. Dates. Times. What was said. What was deleted. What still existed. I called a lawyer. Just a consultation, I told myself. Nothing dramatic. The second I started explaining job loss, accusations, my wife's sudden narrative shift, his tone changed. He told me to document everything. To stop communicating with her unless it was in writing. To protect myself, because situations like this had a way of getting worse before they got better. That sentence stuck with me. When I texted my wife to coordinate picking up more clothes, she responded like I was a stranger. Cold. Formal. She signed her message with her full name. That's when I realized she'd already emotionally divorced me. The person texting me wasn't my wife, it was someone preparing for a clean exit, someone who wanted a paper trail that painted her as reasonable and me as unstable. Instead of spiraling, I felt oddly grounded. Like the fog had lifted just enough to see the battlefield clearly. I couldn't control what she said about me. I couldn't undo what the district had already decided. But I could stop bleeding everywhere just because she kept swinging. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. When I finally went back to the house to get the rest of my things, she wasn't there. She'd texted that she'd be out for the day and left the door unlocked. That felt intentional. Like she wanted control without confrontation. I walked through each room slowly, half expecting some kind of ambush, her suddenly there, another fight, more accusations, but the house was empty and eerily calm. What wasn't calm was the evidence of how quickly she'd erased me. Photos were gone. Not boxed up, gone. My side of the closet was half empty, like she'd already decided what was hers now. A few of my books were stacked by the door, neatly, almost politely, as if that made it less brutal. It hit me then, she hadn't just moved on emotionally. She'd reorganized her life as if I were a temporary inconvenience she'd finally resolved. I found a note on the counter. Just a few lines. No emotion. No apology. She said we should keep things civil, that lawyers would probably be involved soon, and that this was for the best. For who, she didn't say. I crumpled the note and threw it away, hands shaking harder than I wanted to admit. As I loaded the car, a neighbor waved at me. Asked how things were going, mentioned they hadn't seen me in a while. I smiled and said I was just taking some time off. The lie came out smoothly, and that scared me a little. I was becoming someone who knew how to hide damage behind a polite expression. Driving away for the last time, I realized the person I missed most wasn't my wife or my job. It was the version of myself who believed loyalty and decency were enough to protect you. That guy didn't exist anymore. And I wasn't sure yet whether to mourn him or thank him for getting me this far. Acceptance didn't arrive as relief. It showed up as resignation. A dull understanding that this was my life now, and wishing it were different was just another way to stay stuck. I stopped checking her social media. Stopped waiting for messages that might explain everything or magically make it hurt less. There was no explanation that could do that. I heard through someone else that she'd moved in with him. Not officially, not announced, just staying over a lot. The speed of it was almost impressive. Like I'd been a placeholder she'd outgrown. The information didn't devastate me the way I thought it would. It just confirmed what I already knew: she hadn't fallen into this by accident. She'd stepped into it deliberately, and then blamed me for not catching her hand on the way down. I started going on long walks, mostly to avoid sitting still with my thoughts. Somewhere between the motel and a park I'd never noticed before, it clicked that I'd been measuring my worth entirely through how useful I was to other people, students, administrators, a wife who only loved me when I was convenient. Losing all of that at once felt like erasure, but it also stripped things down to something brutally simple. I was still here. Bruised, unemployed, betrayed, but not the monster she'd quietly tried to paint me as. I hadn't cheated. I hadn't lied. I hadn't thrown anyone under the bus to save myself. That didn't fix anything, but it mattered more than I'd expected. Acceptance wasn't peace. It was clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is uncomfortable, but it's also the first thing that doesn't lie to you. By then, the days had started to blur together, but the panic had faded. I found a small, temporary place, nothing fancy, just clean and mine. I sold a few things I didn't need, cut expenses down to the bone, and started sending out applications. Not just teaching jobs. Anything that didn't come with rumors attached. It stung, realizing how quickly a reputation can box you in, but survival has a way of overriding pride. My wife and I only communicated through lawyers at that point. On paper, she was polite. Efficient. Almost generous. In person, well, there was no in person anymore. That distance felt like mercy. I stopped trying to understand how someone I loved could be so cold, because every time I went down that road, I ended up blaming myself for things that were never mine to carry. One afternoon, I ran into a former student at the grocery store. He told me I'd helped him get through a rough year, that he still remembered how I'd listened when no one else did. I barely held it together until I got back to my car. That moment didn't fix my career, but it reminded me that the good I'd done hadn't vanished just because someone decided to rewrite the story. Rebuilding wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Small routines. Early mornings. Long nights. Choosing not to reach out when loneliness hit hardest. I wasn't healed. Not even close. But I was moving forward without dragging her lies behind me, and that felt like progress. I didn't know what the final version of my life would look like yet. But for the first time, it felt like something I'd get to choose. I used to believe that if you were patient enough, kind enough, and loyal enough, things would work out. That truth would eventually surface and be enough to save you. I don't believe that anymore. What I believe now is that some people don't just lie, they build entire realities around those lies, and if you're not careful, you'll start questioning your own memory just to keep the peace. Losing my job and my marriage at the same time nearly broke me. Not because I loved either one blindly, but because both were tied to who I thought I was, the good teacher, the dependable husband, the guy who showed up and did the right thing. Watching those identities get twisted and discarded taught me something brutal but necessary: being good doesn't make you immune to betrayal, and sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. If there's any advice I'd give to someone in a similar situation, it's this: pay attention to patterns, not excuses. When someone shows you they're willing to rewrite reality to avoid responsibility, believe them. And don't wait for closure from the person who hurt you, they benefit from your confusion. I didn't come out of this victorious or enlightened. I came out stripped down to the basics. But I came out honest, and I came out intact. And after everything that was taken from me, that's the one thing I refuse to let anyone touch again.